On the first morning, the sea smelled of wet iron and old secrets. Wind crept along the face of Casterly rock and worried the banners until the cloth gave a patient, tired sigh. Tyrion stood on the western balcony of the Lord's Solar with the shutters open and the glass latched back, letting the damp roll in and cling to his sleeves. In the soft hour before the keep fully woke, before footsteps and orders and the deliberate clatter of the day, there was the natural thrum that the rock made when the tide slid into the caverns below. He could feel the faint tremor through the soles of his boots. It steadied him more than wine did. He had never been taller than a lion cub, but the ledge had been carved for men far larger than he, men who liked to stand and make postures against the dawn. The stone lip came to his breastbone. Beyond it the cliff fell and fell, roughened by ancient chisel marks and nest ledges, down into the foam at the base where the secrets of his bloodline lay. He watched a dark seal bob and vanish in the water. Gulls swung from the wind to scream their little sermons and then swept on. He had slept little. Sleep came like a servant bearing a costly tray and then withdrew at the slightest motion. When he did drift under, he found himself walking corridors that weren't there. Doors opening into rooms he had known as a child and then as a man, voices speaking from behind walls that could not be breached with any tool but time. He had woken to that old sour taste, the taste of words left unsaid and debts left unpaid, which was to say the taste of life. Every room in the rock gave way in some manner to the western sea. Even the lesser passages breathed its salt, and the pantry doors swelled in damp weeks. The cliff face had been the first face he learned, the old stone mother who did not soften, not even for the little son who could not reach the table edge without a stool. That, and the voice of his father measuring him the way a man measures casks. Tapping, listening, judging the hollowness. The sea had not judged. The sea had only filled the caves and gone out again like breath. He felt the thin ache rise beneath his ribs and did not drink to blunt it. A goblet sat on the table behind him, its lip beaded with condensation. Contained water. He brought this and a dowry chest, which I took the liberty of having kept under lock in the treasury. And there is a matter from Lannister that, slowly, Tyrion said, you will kill me with good governance. He took the parchment and broke the red wax carefully, because there was art in every small act and because hands that trembled would be noticed. He read Lord Lefford's neat hand at a leisurely pace he did not feel, the words swimming slightly as the light shifted. Lefford wrote with practiced courtesy. He pledged fealty anew. He recounted the harvest in the Golden Tooth Valley, thin but passable where the river kept its humors. He mentioned with appropriate sadness the collapse of a shaft that had killed 5 men under the Black Teeth Ridge and requested relief for the families. He closed with a suggestion in fine phrases that the Lady Jane Lefford might be of service at the Rock, if she were invited, for she had a keen eye for ledgers and a sharper one for men. Thoughtful, Tyrion said, and felt the tug of a smile he did not show. The relief, of course. The suggestion also, of course. He slid the letter onto the table where the water cut a small crescent into the vellum. You said Lannisport? Halden nodded and produced a second sheaf, this one weighty. A petition from the harbor guilds. They request repair of the eastern quay, which took damage in the last storm, and an answer to their earlier letter regarding the lighthouse. They are willing to contribute, they say, 1/3 of the cost if the Rock will underwrite the remainder and grant them a 10-year reduction in certain customs. They are willing, Tyrion murmured. Are they willing to be grateful if we say no? Gratitude appears nowhere in their sums. It rarely does. He moved to the table, climbed onto the compact stool placed there for him and stood, suddenly nearly at the height other men took for granted, and spread the documents out. Halden approached on slippered feet and arranged the seals so they did not stay. You did not sleep, Halden observed. I wanted to hear the Rock breathe, Tyrion said. He tapped the petition. We owe our harbor not merely safety but pride, Maester. That city is our face. When men think of the West they will see Lannisport first, the fish stink, yes, but also the gilded roofs and the sound ships. If we cannot guarantee that, then we are an outfit of miners set into a cliff, and when the vein gives out we will tumble into the sea with our little lamps. Halden cleared his throat in the way that told Tyrion he was deciding where to set a question. "There is some feeling that the veins have grown stingier, my lord. There is some feeling." Tyrion toyed with the edge of the paper. "There is more than feeling. I will need our master of mines. I will need our steward. I will need a man from the harbor who doesn't wear perfume. And I will need whoever chooses the words in Lefford's letters. Tell them we will hold a morning session after the first meal." He looked again at the Lady Jane sentence and considered the way a suggestion can wear silk while amounting to a demand. "And write to Lord Lefford that I would be honored to receive the Lady Jane as his envoy, for a fortnight, to advise where she may. Send that with a gift that is not too fine but more than perfunctory. A book, perhaps. The Leffords have a chapel library of some renown. Then something not pious. A Myrish lens. That is a suitable instrument. Have the lens etched with the tooth," Tyrion said, half smiling. "Symbolism is cheap and value is dear." He took the goblet and sipped the cold water as if it could drown the embers in him. "What else?" "The Iron Bank has replied to your memorandum." "Ah!" He reached for that letter as if for a chess piece. The seal was plain black wax. He broke it with his thumb and read, while the sea beat below and Halden studied the air near Tyrion's head. Respectful, distant, intent. The letter was courteous in that cool way the Far City made into a knife. They had considered his assessment of the mines and his plans to shift revenue to harbors, glassworks, and wool, as well as to the new charter for plague provision and grain hoards. They acknowledged the wisdom of diversifying in lean years. They did not accept a reduction in the annuities due, and they would dispatch an envoy, one Devran of Tyrosh by way of Bravos, to discuss collateralization of customs and the possibility of a bond secured by the King's writ and the Rock's good faith. "They smell the gold in our name, if not in our earth," Tyrion said. He set the letter down with a touch he intended as casual and which felt close to careful. "Send word to the harbor that we will host Devran properly but not grandly. He is to see prosperity in motion, not a feast we cannot afford to repeat." "I will so arrange," Halden said. "Oh, and Halden," Tyrion added, as the maester prepared to withdraw with his satchel slung like a beloved child. "The mine that collapsed at Black Teeth. I want the names of the men. I want them written in the book. And I want their families to receive the same compensation men of our house would receive. The same, not a fraction. And make sure that is known. It will be remarked upon," Halden said carefully. "Let it be remarked. The Rock stands on the backs of men. If those backs break and we send a thin purse to their widows because their banners are humble, then our own back grows crooked with the shame of it." He tapped the tabletop twice. "We will wield power. We will not ape our father's harshness merely because it is familiar and it sings in the ear with an old tune. Off you go." When the maester had gone, he took the letters once more, not because he had missed anything but because touching them made the day feel solid. He drained the goblet and set it down beside the old gouges on the table where Tywin had placed his seal ring many thousands of times. The marks looked like small mouths that had opened to swallow commands and never closed. He rubbed a finger over one and felt the smoothness polished by generations. He did not pray. He spoke aloud, as he sometimes did when alone because it tethered the language to air. "We will do it differently," he told the room. "I will do it differently." The day assembled itself, not hastily, not with ceremony. Servants stepped through the choreographies they knew without orders. A fire woke in the hearth. Bread smells wandered cold corridors and were improved by passing the kitchen doors, and arrived at last in the solar warm and companionable. Tyrion ate without tasting and then put on the better coat he disliked. A deep red velvet cut to flatter a body he did not have, and the ring that said Lannister without need of signature. He took his cane not because he needed it but because it sent a message of deliberate motion rather than shortness. He walked, and the rock moved around him the way a great animal shifts when a fly lands. Not much, but enough that you knew it had noticed. In the lesser audience chamber, with its windows carved to look out at waves the color of iron filings, he took the chair that was a chair and not a throne. The raised seat was to his measure and yet it had weight, and his knees knew the difference when he climbed upon it. To the right hand, a place for the steward. To the left, the small table for the maester, with his goose quills and the sand shaker. Behind, the two guards who looked like carved lions until they breathed. The first petitioners were from the harbor guilds. They carried the big ledger of signatures between them as if bringing a cousin for judgment. Tyrion knew the front men by sight. Maldo of Lannister, whose beard had trapped a crumb of breakfast and whose eyes were sharp. Cedran of the fishing fleet, who had shoulders like weathered benches. A younger man with clean hands and a clean wool mantle and an expression that was trying very hard to be fully formed, Darrett, if Tyrion recalled. Apprentice to the wine merchants' guild and ambitious to be remembered by someone important. "My lords," Maldo said with the ease of a man who had spoken in this room when it belonged to another, "we thank you for hearing us." "Tyrion will do," he said, and watched the slight confusion that always followed the word spoken as an instruction rather than a courtesy. "Speak, masters." They spoke of the eastern quay and its stones lifted partly by the storm, partly by neglect. They spoke of a nameless sandbar that had grown like a slow beast near the harbor mouth and needed dredging. They spoke of the lighthouse flame and how it had burned there since the reign of the Lion 2 generations back, and how if it dimmed more than it had in recent months, shipmasters would have cause to choose other harbors in foul weather. They spoke, too, of customs burdens and of tariffs paid by men who did not own ships and therefore wind, and of their willingness to contribute if their contribution returned to them in forgiveness elsewhere. Tyrion heard them out, leaning back with his hands folded so his ring rested atop the other fingers, and spoke without glittering. When they had exhausted their tale and the younger man had said 3 sentences he would regret later for their bravado, Tyrion nodded once. "You will have stone," he said, "and you will have dredges. We will fund these by a levy to be shared between the Rock and the guilds, proportioned thus. For every 3 parts paid by the guilds, the Rock will pay 2. We will match not in equal measure but in willing measure, and we will audit the work not with the eyes of men who sit behind tables but with the souls of men who stand in water." Maldo's mouth opened to protest. They had asked for the Rock to shoulder 3 parts, not 2, and Tyrion lifted a hand and the protest died politely, as a guest does when he spills but a little wine and sees the host lift 2 fingers in forgiveness. "As to customs," Tyrion went on, "tenure reductions are for moments when we sit atop a mountain that grows taller as we watch. We are not upon such a mountain. We will grant a remission for 6 years, and in that time you will build a lighthouse flame that does not need the favor of the wind to burn bright, and you will write me a simple charter stating the manner in which the guilds will hold each other to account. Not 2 pages of sausages, 2 paragraphs. If you fail to hold yourselves to this, the remission ceases." He let a breath move in him. "And send a sloop to pick up driftwood and trash in the harbor once attendee. I will not have visitors think us careless because our bins are empty of refuse and our water full of it." Cedran laughed, short and deep. "That I can do with pleasure," he said. "My men will comp. We'll do it." Darrett murmured something about the light, eager. Tyrion fixed him with a look that said yes. "I see your urn of hope," and then gave Maldo the closing nod. "We thank you," the bearded man said, and he meant it for at least half the things Tyrion had said. That was as good as gratitude becomes in matters with sums. After them, Lady Jane Lefford herself did not arrive, of course. We must let anticipation toil a little before we harvest it. Instead came a messenger from the Black Teeth with the names of the dead men written in a hand more careful than the writer's custom had ever been. Halden read them aloud, and the names hung like banners in the air. Tyrion repeated each silently and matched it to a coin from a specific purse in his memory. He told Halden to see to the families immediately, and to send for the miners' foreman, a man named Togar with a scar that divided his forehead like an old riverbed divides a field. Togar came later, hands like wooden bowls, and Tyrion asked questions that showed he had walked shafts and understood the language of timbers. Togar left with astonishment that had softened into stubborn loyalty by the time he passed the 4th doorway in the passage. Between petitions, Halden unfolded the letter from the iron bank again and set it nearer the edge of the table. It wasn't insolence. Halden was reminding him that time made its own petitions. He kept the letter in the corner of his eye. It was not a thing to rush. He would rather arrive at that table having spoken to his steward and the master of mines and the harbor men and to his own better angels. And to one other man who knew the underside of the city and could tell him where hidden money went to find friends. "Send for Bronn," he said without raising his voice. He had expected the air to change when Bronn was announced, and it did, though subtly. Guards breathed a little deeper. Halden pulled his chain an inch lower on his neck. Bronn wore the clothes of a man who could be comfortable at a low table or a high one and not complain about the food at either. His grin was a blade wrapped in leather. "My lord," Bronn said, amused by the shape the words made in his mouth. "I learn by rumor," Tyrion said, "that you have acquired the habit of sleeping in rooms with good doors. I acquired a house with good doors. Doors cost less than swords if you buy them once and lock them often. A profound principle of governance." Tyrion waved him closer. "You know the harbor. I know where the nets tear and where the boys go to mend them when their wives think they are at prayer. And the keys. I know where the stones wobble enough to spill a crate of lime if a man trips. Rats. Always. But I know where they shift in the warehouses, when shipments arrive light and when they leave heavy." "Good." Tyrion leaned forward, elbows on the armrests, fingers steepled in a way he had mocked when his father did it, and now found useful for keeping his left hand from fidgeting with his ring. "Our friends from across the sea will be sending a man named Devran. I expect him to try to look at our house from the side no one shows. I want to see it first. Walk the harbour. Or tonight. Don't knock. Find the leaks that are new and the old ones with new paint. Bring me names if you like, but mostly bring me places. I want to put my foot down where the stone has been hollowed by thieves." "You're asking me to point out men who pay me occasionally," Bronn said, considering. "It's contrary to a certain code." "We are friends," Tyrion said mildly. "Friends do not ask each other to starve. I will pay for your soul's inconvenience. Shall I bring it back cleaner than I found it? Bring it back with a map drawn on it." Tyrion lifted a hand. "Before you go, call upon the master of the shipwrights. Tell him I want a record of every hull laid down in the last 3 years. Bring that record to me and have him tell no one he brought it." "You'd be a good thief," Bronn said. "That was a compliment once leveled at my father." He said it lightly and watched Bronn angle his head. "Go on then. Walk." Bronn went the way he had come, leaving the faint smell of leather and streets behind him. Tyrion breathed it in as if it purified the air of the rock's older scents. By midday the chamber had warmed. Halden added logs to the fire with the exaggerated awkwardness of a man trying to do a thing below his station and make it appear effortless. Guards shifted feet. A fly landed on the thick glass of the sea-facing window and cleaned its forelegs industriously, looking like a priest deciding how best to absolve good men of smaller sins. Tyrion thought of the rock as a creature again, and of the tiny beings who crawled upon it making plans. He chose to feel tenderness instead of contempt for the little shifting forms. His steward, Armand Swift, arrived breathless with the armor of apologies already buckled on. "My lord," Swift panted. "The casks, those for the feast on Maiden's Day, too have spoiled. My fault." "No, the cooper's fault." "No, it is." "Relax," Tyrion said. "We will serve wine that will not make our guests grimace and thus confuse them into thinking themselves virtuous. And we will not hold a feast that convinces them we have crushed our grapes between rubies. Sit, Armand. Tell me how the mine accounts look." Armand sat as if sitting were a test and failing it would cost him a place at table. He pulled papers from his bag and laid them down as men lay down ransom money. Now came the surgery he had been planning since he set foot in his father's solar and saw, beneath the furnishings and portraits and the lavender sprigs hung by servants who believed in their powers, a faint residue of fear. He wanted to wash the room in something else. The only soap that reached into stone was truth, and truth, like strong soap, stung. They went through lines and lines, silent but for the whisper of paper and the occasional hum of Halden recalculating. There was gold still. There were pockets of good or that put up the proper fight. There were rumors of a new seam near to water, and rumors of a seam rumored elsewhere. But the trend was a trickle's kin to a stream's. the slope a line a layman could feel with the edge of his thumb. "The mines will not stop tomorrow," Tyrion said aloud. "Say it like a weather report and not like a panic. But the crest lies behind us. We are upon the downward path, and the more we strip the hillside, the less it grows back. We will have less, and we will have to be clever. We will not flog the earth like a lazy servant, because that is the habit of masters. We will treat it like a son who has grown old in our service." He paused because he always felt the edge of that word. "We will add new sons." "Glass," Halden said, and pushed forward a parchment where Tyrion had scribbled months ago an ungainly plan for furnaces near Lannisport, using the sand north of the harbor, buying fine sand from the Dornish marshes by arrangement, employing lens makers and window makers and bottle blowers, the latter to stamp in their bottoms a lion's head, so that even when men drank in inns 2 valleys away, they would turn their mugs and subtle pride would work like yeast. "Wool," Tyrion agreed. "Not merely bales to sell to the Reach for filling mattresses and purses, but cloth finished well and dyes. Madder and woad and a purple that only pretends to be deep." He touched another paper, a draft of guild charters that did not favor the oldest families so much that the youngest could not eat. "We will need coin to begin," Armin said, and his voice sounded like a man walking along a wall where the wind is strong and the stones are old. "We have coin," Tyrion said. "We have coin that belongs to the future, which we will borrow from its little hands and then give back more and cleaner. And we have the Iron Bank, which would be very pleased to be our partner if they can be sure of eating first. I will give them a partial fast in exchange for more meals later." "A partial," Halden began and then nodded. "Remission. Of their fear, not of their debt," Tyrion said. "We will pledge the customs we have argued about all morning. We will tie the turn of the key that opens the harbor chests to the turn of their hearts, and then we will see if they have hearts." He rolled his shoulders. His bones, arranged by caprice and fate and the sins of men, clicked softly. "Also, we will be good to men whose names never appear in the ledger, and their goodwill will do more work than our rhetoric. Armand, half levies for widows who rent from us will now be quarter levies. And if any steward or understeward says a poor family owes an arrear that was in fact the steward's nephew's greed, send me his name so that I might have a little talk with him about arithmetic." "Very good, my lord," Armand said faintly, as if someone had quietly rearranged the furniture of his mind. After they had eaten, cold beef, hard cheese that stung the tongue, olives in a bowl of salt, Tyrion left the chamber and demanded something he did not often demand. He wanted to walk alone, without guards breathing their watch. Fullness behind him, without Halden's letter-scented gravity, without Armin's twitchy calculations. He went down the passage toward the Lion's Way, the long stair that wound inside the cliff like a ribbed throat, a great throat carved by hands and then polished by feet, down and down until it opened onto the galleries that looked into the sea caves where the tide came and went. He paused at the top and put a hand on the stone. It had lain there before his house had, and it would remain when he was a story misremembered. He descended, feeling the tiny adjustments his knees made to keep him steady, placing the cane lightly because the cane knew the stones and did not need to be told where they stood up and where they tipped. Torches burned along the way, but this was a place of cool light and echo, and it was easy to imagine that voices you heard were your own from a past day or some giant's remark delivered by delay. He had walked here as a boy, alone when loneliness could no longer be borne in bright rooms. He would sit on the bench cut into the wall and listen to the sea and speak softly to it as if it were the only honest relative he had. "If I jump," he had once said to the water when he was 12 and had seen his father's face turn from disappointment to contempt without the benefit of breath in between. "Do I die or do I learn something my family will never know?" He had not jumped, and that too taught him something. Not all bravery looks like a fall. When he reached the gallery, he sat now upon the stone bench and let the damp find him. The water reached up its white hands and never touched him. His persistence consoled him. The sea has no illusions. It erodes truthfully. He thought of a woman he had loved and the lie that had been stuffed into his mouth like a gag. He thought of a different woman who had loved him in a way that meant survival for her and survival in the smaller sense for him. He did not judge himself harshly, but he judged himself. Kept his blade honest. Soft footsteps approached, echoing, uneven with haste. He turned his head slightly before they arrived. Few people came here without orders, and fewer came with a gliding step. A boy come to the upper kitchens later and ask for cheese that is not hard enough to break your teeth. Tell them your lord commanded it in a fit of kindness, and let them fret over whether to obey. The boy laughed unexpectedly, a clean little bark of surprise. He bowed and retreated, and his footfalls grew smaller until they joined the murmurs of the water. Tyrion sat a while longer, the notes soft in his palm, then rose and climbed the stairs with patience. He stopped once to rest. Patience was not defeat. It was a means of saving the breath needed to speak when one reached the room where one must speak. The day folded itself around that little message like a cloak around a dagger. He met again with Haldon and Armand. He allowed himself a cordial with citrus peel in it because he could not bear to drink without tasting and had decided he would taste this day what little was placed before him. He signed 2 letters and dictated 3 and then refused to dictate the 4th because words meant to warm sometimes required the warmth of the mouth that gave them. Late afternoon arrived, and with it a bell from the east postern gate. The Lady Jane Lefford had come earlier than expected, the messenger called, and had brought a chest and a woman who was called a cousin, which meant perhaps chaperone or perhaps accountant. Tyrion instructed that she be shown to the chamber with the good light that was not too fine. He changed his coat, a smaller vanity, but one to explain later to himself, and went to meet her. She was taller than he had imagined and younger by 2 years than he had thought. She had the sturdy grace of a woman who has lived most of her hours where the wind can find her. The light from the sea window chose her cheekbones and then reconsidered and settled lower, on the firm line of her mouth. She wore gray with a narrow gold edging, and the lion in Tyrion's ring noted that the gold was a declaration, not an apology for thrift. Jane bowed precisely. "My lord," she said. "My lady." He indicated a seat and did not climb onto his own until she had arranged her dress without fuss. "I am told you have an eye for numbers. I am told you have one for people," she said. "They are harder to add. But the sums matter because the people do." He watched her face for the little flickers, agreement, reserve, experiment. "Your father thought to send you to advise me. A generous notion, and one that suggests he thinks me either wise enough to be advised or foolish enough to need the appearance of advice. You wish me to agree to one and deny the other. I wish you to tell me the truth with an expression that will make men in this house forget you told it to me." He smiled. "We are being rude to each other pleasantly. Let us be blunt pleasantly. We both know what the other wants. I want the golden tooth to be loyal in more than words and to pay in more than slogans. You want the rock to pour coin into the tooth's coffers by way of a misnamed relief that secures your folk against famine winters. Perhaps we can give each other what we want because it is sensible." She did not smile, but her eyes altered slightly, which was better. "I did not bring my father's ledgers," she said. "I brought mine." "Good." He gestured to Haldon, who had perched to the side, to bring the papers. "Then perhaps you will look at the plan for harbor works and tell me where the sandbar will resemble a difficult cousin rather than a child, and where the quay must be rebuilt rather than coaxed." He slid the paper across and watched as she took it, read, then turned it sideways and then back. She did not speak quickly. He liked that. "Your remission plan will breed resentment," she said at last. "The oldest guild will say they pay for improvements that benefit the newer ones. Resentment, you say, as if naming it might keep men from thinking they are virtuous when they are merely greedy. It won't," she said. "But if you carve the levy into smaller cuts and scatter them, it will bleed less obviously." "Scatter?" Tyrion leaned forward. "Explain." 3 small increases for services no one considers, instead of one large obvious increase for the thing they want. A tiny fee for ferrying priests across the harbor when the tide is high. A repair tax on the ropes that swing from warehouse to warehouse. A lantern levy at night, because only thieves love darkness. He nodded, delighted. "You have indeed an eye for people." She inclined her head without coyness. "You will need it soon," she said. "The envoy from the Iron Bank will not accept less than your best courtesy. He will be intelligent and will dislike being entertained as if he were a courtier. He will try to take from you more than is due because that is his duty. And mine is to give him less than he asks while making him feel he has been given more than I planned." Tyrion regarded her. "You know the language of coins and of men. I grew up with brothers who spoke the latter as if it were their only tongue," she said dryly. "And I learned the first because the second paid little else." They spoke a while longer, finding how their minds had been stocked by similar anxieties. Tyrion did not flirt. There were flavors he loved but did not always eat. There were appetites he would not trust to steer a house. When they finished, he had a clearer thing than agreement, an understanding of the places where they could disagree fruitfully. "I will ask you to sit with us when the envoy comes," Tyrion said. "Not in the front, to the side. A shadow is useful. It reminds a man of his shape." "As you wish," she said. "I will speak only when you wish. Speak when I err." He stood and she stood, and it took both of them a second to adjust their angle so that the usual social negotiations of height and deference did not embarrass either. Then they turned and walked to the door. The woman called cousin followed, her face expressionless and thus quietly disapproving of most things that would matter. It was reassuring. That night he went down to the eastern quay with Bronn and 3 men who knew how to look like they did not mind the dark. The keys drew in the sky's last light and held it a moment as a mirror holds a face. Warehouses hunched, outlined by roof angles, and the smell was of tar and rope hair, of fish scales caught in the planks from some earlier hour when they had flashed briefly like coins and then become only smell. "Here," Bronn said softly, and they took cover behind a pile of repaired netting stacked like a collapsed cloud. Tyrion's knees protested the crouch, and he told them a joke in his head to make them obey. A wagon came from the town, wheels complaining softly. It stopped near a warehouse that belonged to a man who gave generously to the harbor charity and therefore could not be suspected easily of greed. 2 men unloaded sacks with exaggerated care and carried them to a back door where a light all but hid behind its lid. Another man, the one watching, walked in a small circle as if he were a clock's hand. "Salt," Bronn whispered, sniffing. "But not for cod. For keeping a thing dry when it ought to be counted wet." Tyrion watched and counted the sacks. He liked numbers in motion. They told truths that paraded right by liars. When the men were nearly done, a 4th man emerged from the street's shadow and came to the wagon's side and tapped the wood twice with a ring. The man with the circle gesture stiffened a fraction and then sloppy bowed. Coins changed hands with the butter-smooth motions of men who had practiced not dropping money in dark places. "How many guilds?" Tyrion breathed. 3, Bronn said. "Maybe 4, because the 4th will want a piece of the insurance." Tyrion let out his breath in a slow ribbon. "We will not cut off hands," he said. "We will cut the habit." "That takes longer," Bronn murmured. "Hands you can count. So can habits," Tyrion said. "You count the places where the rat expects the wall and you take the wall awa. Why, so the rat runs into the open. Then you build a new wall whose cracks are where you please." He watched the men finish and move off. The night had cooled into that hour where stars feel more present than roofs. "We will need a reeve who does not take bribes and does not take orders except from me. You will find me such a man." Bronn's grin came like a knife flashed from a sleeve and then returned there. "You ask for unicorns and then complain that their horns don't fit your saddle. Find me a donkey with a horn glued on," Tyrion said, and Bronn chuckled softly. "And then teach him to bite men who pat his neck too often." They stayed until the last of the wagons had rattled away and the rats had returned to their honest work when the world thought it slept. On their way back they passed a beggar asleep against a post with his head at an angle no one would choose. Tyrion paused and set a coin beside the man's hand. Bronn made a sound that bemused without judging. "No man gets rich giving away coins," he said. "True," Tyrion said, "but some get peace, and I have to be wiser than my father in at least one thing, and I choose this." In the days that followed, Tyrion drew by inches a tighter net around the places where waist slipped between fingers. It was not grand work, and it was not the kind of thing bards sing when the wine is red, but it was the work of a lord who could see walls and understand where they held and where they gave. He spent 2 mornings in the mines with Togar and the Master of Pumps, whose shoulders had a permanent hunch from bending to speak in shafts. He touched the damp stones and put his ear to the timbers and felt the slow knocks that meant water would break through soon. He ordered supports moved and tunnels closed and others widened in ways that looked like caution to some and like audacity to others. He told Togar, when they sat on a damp ledge with their heels getting wet and their lungs taking an air that smelled of coal and wet rope, that the rock could not always be asked for gold. It would have to be asked for stone, and the stone would have to be carved into clever shapes. In the afternoons he walked the harbor with Bronn and sometimes with Jane, and the 3 of them wore a path among the warehouses and the rope piles like a new-cut channel where a stream has found a shorter way. They spoke to men who had never expected to speak with a lord and fewer still to be believed, and they were not always believed. Tyrion learned it was good to not always be believed. It meant he was not yet fully known, and being a little unknown gives a man a place to hide when he needs to be honest. He wrote to the houses of the West. He invited their sons and daughters to come be wards at the Rock, and the word ward he used deliberately, because it meant custody to those who feared and opportunity to those who hoped. He offered marriages, not as bribes, as bridges. He thought of the way his father had used marriage like a trapdoor and decided there was a better use for a door. He visited the sept and stood at the back, not out of disrespect but because he liked to watch others practice their belief from a distance. He gave the septon 2 threads to pull at, a donation to repair the leaky roof where the small folk sat, and a promise to meet with him privately about the grain hoards for winter. He gave no money to the altar. He put it into the grain. The gods, if they counted, could count that as worship. The envoy came on a bright day after rain, walking with the air of a man who expects floors to be clean and minds to be sharp. Devran of Tyrosh, by way of bravos, had that neatness that wealth cultivates and that poverty recognizes like a personal insult. He bowed with exactness. Tyrion bowed back with exactness, and then he smiled a small human smile that made most men show their teeth in reply. Devran did not show his teeth. He removed his gloves, laid them on the table between them like a diagnosis, and sat with his back straight. They drank not wine but water with citrus slices, because Tyrion wanted to set a table that said, "This house does not lie to itself even in its cups." Devran noted the choice and filed it like a dagger placed just beyond reach. He spoke of the bank in a voice that sounded as if it had been trained by the sea to carry. Tyrion spoke of the West in a voice trained by being underestimated. They both used words as coins and as fences. They walked along the edge of the custom revenues. Tyrion offered collateral that sounded generous and which he and Jane had arranged to be not quite as generous as it seemed. Devran pressed for a pledge that would have meant the bank could starve the Rock in a lean year without breaking the letter of the agreement. Tyrion smiled as if charmed by Devran's thoroughness, and reminded him of an old story about a deal made with a man who forgot that time is not only coin but heartbeat. "You have a reputation," Devran said at one point, studying the glass as if it might say something. "For wit." "I have one for ugliness too," Tyrion said. "That has proved more useful. Men tell their ugliness to those they think uglier." Devran's mouth moved in what might have been a genuine smile finally, small but real, like a coin he had found under the edge of a rug and decided to keep. Jane sat in the corner and watched. Twice her eyes flicked to Tyrion's left hand, and twice he had known that meant resist. Once she looked at the iron candlestick and then at Devran's gloved hand and then at Tyrion, and he knew that meant push. He pushed. Devran inclined his head a millimeter. They ended with ink. Halden sanded it and blew and the grains hopped like fleas and settled. Tyrion signed with the ring that had left grooves in the table years before and did not press hard. Devran signed with the neatness of a man who has made his name in a way that will not be questioned even if it cannot be read. They stood and bowed and it looked, to any who watched, like 2 men who had both won. When Devran had gone, Tyrion poured himself wine and drank it. 1 cup, no more, and let himself feel the relief, which was not joy but a lessening of pressure like the sluice gate opened a hand's width. Jane came to stand by the window and tilted her head as if listening to faint music. "He will seek loopholes," she said, no triumph in it. "Let him," Tyrion said. We tied the knot with humility and a small lie. They will not find either end. He sighed. Let it scrape a little. We bought our future's breath. You bought time, she corrected gently. Yes, he said. Time is what you buy when you cannot afford anything else. At dusk, the galleries below the sea vibrated a little more. Big tides were coming. There was word from the Riverlands and from the capital. A new edict from a boy king tempered by an old woman's hand and amended by a hungry man's whisper. There was word from the Reach too. Ships moving like a school of coordinated fish, edges of war sketched with the tip of a quill. Tyrion set the papers in a neat fan and told Haldon to let them wait until morning. Haldon's eyebrows rose, but he kept his counsel. The morning would still be there if he arrived at it having slept. He went to stand on the balcony where the day had begun. The wind had shifted slightly. It smelled not of wet iron now but of fennel and the faint ghost of smoke from cooking fires in Lannister, 200 feet down and a mile off. Lights pricked the city with their sensual arithmetic, the numbering of families, not of sums. A ship moved with a lantern hung unsteadily, and somewhere a woman laughed in a way that decided the evening was not hopeless. Behind him the rock breathed, its air warmed by the day, and he put his hands on the stone lip and felt its old coolness. He thought of his father, not in a gesture of forgiveness and not in one of rage. He thought of a man who had believed strength was made by thinning the air in a room until only one man could breathe and all others would call that clarity. He thought of another way to make more air. He smiled without teeth. He had made a pledge to himself and to the sea that had once listened to a boy too small to be visible to the god of his house. He would be difficult to like and easy to respect. He would not make men laugh unless laughter helped the work. He would not let their fear of a short man turn into a habit of short work. A soft step behind him. He did not turn. There are steps you know the way you know the pace of your own much-admired enemies. Maester, he said. The ravens, Haldon said, have returned twice as quickly as they went. Men are answering their names. Some gladly, and some not, and some not. House Prester wavers. House Crakehall says they must consider their grain. House Westerling sends a poem. Tyrion chuckled. We will read it and decide if it is treasonous or merely bad. He turned then and took from Haldon the list, its ink new and its patience old. And the others? A few who never answered anything now answer. The Paynes say yes to the wardship. The Liddens ask for forgiveness for debts 3 years gone. The SWYFTS. Armand will recuse himself, Tyrion said. I will forgive half and demand half. Not in coin, in grain. They will store enough to feed 1,000 for a winter month, and they will rotate it, and they will make their overseers swear by the mother before each rotation. He looked at the end of the list, and the Cleganes write in a hand that looks as if a dog held the quill. But it is legible. Good. We like legible hounds. You seem... Haldon searched for the word as if it might be under the table. Steady. I stood in the rock below and listened to the sea pretend to be something else, Tyrion said. It reminded me that everything pretends and almost nothing entirely lies. Haldon made the small sound he made when he was content and when he wanted to note that he had made the sound. You will wear a path, he said. From the solar to the galleries if you go there whenever the day is heavy. Better that than wear a path from the solar to the cellar where the wine is kept, Tyrion said. He watched the lights of Lannisport and imagined the houses behind each light. When we speak of governance, we speak of systems and levers and words stamped with rings. But there is also the matter of a child's fever at midnight and the woman who fetches water and the man who worries the child will die as his brother did because a midwife said the gods were angry with their family. There is the matter of the shop that opens and does not sell enough. The man who boats out at dawn and comes home with less fish than he wants and more than he had any right to count on. The girl who wishes to read the names on the glass jars in the healer's case. He thought of them, not because he thought himself noble but because they were the bricks that made the wall he wanted to stand before and say, "This holds." In the weeks after the envoy, he began to change little things because he had learned from the minds that little errors, allowed to rest, become collapses. He had the path to the harbor swept daily and the sweepers paid properly. He had the night watch in the lower wards changed without pattern so the watchers could not be bribed with predictability. He instituted a practice on 7th days that the Rock's kitchens would cook stews with bones and leavings, and the stew pots would be set in the courtyard at noon, and anyone who wished could bring a bowl. He did not say charity. He said stew. Men argued less with stew. He created what he called, in a private joke he refused to explain to anyone who asked, the Court of Small Stones. Twice a month a morning was set aside for petitions from small folk whose matters were too trifling to trouble a lord, which meant they were the matters that broke lives and made them sour. He sat and listened to a woman complain that a neag boar's goat ate her cabbage, and to a boy whose father had died in the mines and who wanted his father's pick, and to a man who said the reeve had taken his pig and never paid. He watched as the people learned, slowly, to speak without flattery and to tell him exactly what had happened. He decided some cases with coins, some with lectures gently given, some by sending brawn to frighten a man into righteousness. He did not delight in power. He allowed it to be a tool. He read at night too, because reading is a way to make the room larger. He read of the old Lannisters, ruthless, shining, ridiculous, brave. He read a Braavosi account of storms in the summer sea that described water like a living thing and sailors like men humbler than kings. He read a small book on mines written by a man who had died when a tunnel surprised him. He slept sometimes with the book on his chest and woke with the taste of paper on his tongue. And he told himself it was fitting that knowledge should leave a taste. He wrote once, late, a letter he did not send. He began it, Father. He did not continue. He called it Dear, scratched it out and wrote, Lord. Then he wrote nothing. He folded the letter and left it in the bottom drawer of the desk, where he kept little things he did not want to decide about, and it lay there like a fish in ice. It was not all good work. He failed too. He ordered a levy on a small valley whose people were too proud to ask for help and too poor to pretend they did not need it, and his levy drove them to borrow from a man who broke their tools when they could not pay. He corrected the mistake late and with more coin than it would have taken to avoid the trouble, and he did not excuse himself. He learned the names of the men who had not warned him properly and discovered they had thought he would not listen. He fired two and spoke to one for a long time and then kept him on because fear makes liars, and he wanted men who had been given a second chance to tell the truth to the next man who needed it. There were intimacies. He did not advertise them, and he did not refuse their solace. He knew, because the city knew, that a lord's bed is part of his governance whether he wishes it to be or not. Once a woman from the harbor who ran a small honest house and did not let her girls go hungry came to ask for protection from a man who had found a hammer named Piety. Tyrion gave her protection openly, signed in Haldan's neat hand, and he paid for a door with an iron bar. He did not go to her bed, though she would have made it a gift. He wanted the favor not to be bought in that coin. Another time he did go to a bed that was suffered and then enjoyed, and he left it better than he had found it. And he put a purse on a table, and no one knew if it were for the sex or for the child the woman mentioned that sometimes woke crying at midnight. He did not keep the ledger of his intimacies in his desk. He kept it in his conscience. He did not seek friendship, but friendship found him as it finds men who are neither cruel nor overly impressed with themselves. He and Bronn made a little village of their quarrels and sat in it often and laughed at the way the other built houses. Bronn continued to take coin from men Tyrion would have preferred he did not, and yet he brought Tyrion truths that no other man could carry without spilling. Haldan, who had thought himself a temporary necessity under a lord who would soon be replaced by another kind of man, bought a better broom for his ravenry and began to answer questions before Tyrion had asked them. Armand, frightened and perpetually apologetic Armand, grew a backbone of sorts and corrected a man who called him a lickspittle, and then came to Tyrion confessing this minor bravery as if it were the worst sin and waited for the punishment. Tyrion gave him praise in public and advice in private about the liquor he sipped to soften his cringing. Jane Lefford stayed longer than a fortnight and then did not leave at all, and no one was quite sure when the fortnight had become a life. If there were whispers, they were soft. The work was louder. In the spring, the sea lifted a ship onto the sandbar and left her there overnight, and the men of the harbor cut a channel that was not the one they had argued about all winter, and the ship slid off at the next tide like a fish released from a shallow pool. Men who had gambled on bad outcomes cursed their luck because good governance makes poor betting. Tyrion stood on the quay and watched it and permitted himself the private arrogance of a craftsman enjoying a carved curve. He did not say "I told you so," because the harbor needed no lord who spoke like a child with a new toy. In the summer he went to the Golden Tooth and sat in Lord Lefford's hall and ate bread that was properly salted and drank ale that had been kept at the right coolness. He walked the ridges with Jane and saw the mines bite into the mountain and saw where they might be made to nibble instead. He stood with young men who had expected to stand with a lord twice his size and watched the way they recalibrated to a world that contained both mines and him. He went to the river and saw children with legs in the water, and he tossed in stones to make ripples, and they laughed and called him the king of skipping stones, and he bowed and told them he would crush their realm with 5 pebbles if they let him. He heard, then, as he would hear forever, the news from other places where other kings needed to be resisted or bowed to, and he kept it at a distance. The work was here, presently, in a valley with sheep and men with opinions about wool. In the autumn he stood with Devran on the balcony and watched ships come in under a sky that had made up its mind to rain tomorrow. "You are more cautious than your father," Devran said, as if offering a criticism. "I am more cowardly," Tyrion said, "but I am also braver. My father would sometimes set his neck where he believed the blade would not fall. I do not put my neck where any blade could be made to fall without my consent." He glanced at Devran. "An advantage of shortness. The neck remains near the heart and difficult to expose." Devran looked at him as if at a puzzle he had nearly solved. "The bank prefers men who pay when they say they will and who do not compel us to make examples of them." "You will not need to make an example of me," Tyrion said, "because I have cut all." They walked the rock's interior with candles, stopped where the crack had widened, and listened. "Water," Togar said. "It is finding a new path." "Will it take one we cannot afford to give?" Tyrion asked. "It will if we do not teach it otherwise." They taught it. They moved men at dawn with ropes and pulleys and the sort of soft words men speak to the earth when they have learned not to command it. They shored the tunnel and built a new channel where the water could go and not trouble the older bones of the place. Tyrion stood with his boots in water that made his feet ache and pointed and tried not to shiver. He failed to look grand and did not care. Men saw. When it was done and the rock had ceased muttering and returned to its slow breath, he went up to the solar and changed clothes and drank hot wine and watched the sun crawl into morning as if the world had been born a little drunk. Jane came in with flour dust on her cheek. She had been to the kitchens to scold someone about the waste of flour that turned to paste in the buckets. He wiped the flour with his thumb and then looked at the mark on his skin and thought, briefly and sharply, of other flour, another life. He put his thumb on the rim of the cup and left a mark there and watched it dissolve. He did not speak of ghosts. He allowed them to sit a while and then they left. It is the courtier's job to appear busy. It is a lord's job to be busy and have no time to show it. Letters came now from places that had not written to the rock in years. Some were couched in the language of old men minding their honor, as if it were a delicate thing that could be used only once more. Others were the blunt speaking of men who grew things in fields and had little patience for delicacy. A few were written by women who had taken houses' reins when men had found themselves on battlefields or in graves, and their writing was efficient and free of the furniture of flattery. He liked those letters and answered them first. He did not go to the capital. The capital came to him in the form of exiles and rumors and demands couched in courtesies. He received a threadbare knight with pretensions and no horse, wanting a command because he had once been told he looked heroic. He received a nursemaid with 2 children whose father had died at a river he had no business dying at, who asked for a small plot near the city where she might sow onions. He gave the knight a purse and an honorable refusal and watched the man's pride hold him upright. And he gave the woman the plot and seed and a pitifully small lecture about onions that he later realized had made her less nervous because men in his position rarely spoke of onions. The capital would do what it always did: draw men like flies to honey and then call them pests when they drowned. He was content to let that be and keep his flies alive. In the second winter at the Rock, he went to the harbor in the morning and saw the lighthouse flame strong against a sky that bargained with snow and lost. The glass was clear, the mirrors polished. The men of the lighthouse had the careful, happy pride of men whose work holds. He stood with them a moment and listened to their remarks about oil consumption as if they were speaking of a beloved child's appetite. He congratulated them and then, for reasons he did not explore, he walked down the path to the lower steps where earlier, ungenerous winters had left their stains. A woman sat there with a basket in her lap, and when she saw him she rose halfway and then sat again because her legs were tired and she had been told to save energy where she could. She had the look of a person who expects refusal and has made her face a place where it cannot be seen. "My lord," she said, almost defiant. "Good morning," he said. "Are you waiting for someone?" "Waiting for an answer," she said, and he recognized in her voice the grinding wheel of patience. "I came yester." "Do not apologize," he said. "What answer?" She told him of her husband, of a reeve who had measured their harvest with a larger measure than the neighbors because the reeve disliked a remark the husband had made at the stew pot in the courtyard. It was a story so small that it would have spoiled if left in the sun. It needed handling. He asked names, she gave them, and he knew the reeve. The man had done good work in other matters. He told the woman to go to the kitchens and eat and wait, and he sent a boy to fetch the reeve, and when the man came he did not roar, because roaring is for fathers who enjoy the echo. He told the reeve to fetch the measure and bring it, and he made him measure 3 sacks and saw that the measure was indeed a little larger. He watched the man's face as comprehension and then shame and then stubbornness fought. "Do you understand what you have done?" Tyrion asked. "It is only a small thing," the reeve said, and then saw himself say it and flinched. "Small things are my business," Tyrion said. "The big things take care of themselves by killing people indiscriminately and calling it fate. The small things can be made better." He reduced the man's wages for a month and made him serve stew in the courtyard twice a week, and he told him exactly why, and then he told him to go home and tell his wife what had occurred. The man went, head bowed, and Tyrion turned to the woman and told her the outcome, and he didn't know if she would have rather seen blood. He hoped she preferred the stew. He watched her walk away, and he looked at the lighthouse, and he felt something that he would not name relief because relief suggests a crisis averted, and this was only rightness set in a place where it would stand until a new error pushed it over. In the 3rd spring the mines stuttered again, and Togar, now with hair that had made its peace with the white at his temples, came to Tyrion with a look he had not worn before. "My lord," he said, "there is a vein. We found it where the rock sounded dull before, and then it sounded slightly less dull, and we guessed. It is not thick, but it is bright. It will do. It will do." The prettiest words a steward can hear. Tyrion smiled as if a child had told him a joke he only partly understood and loved entirely. "We will take it as a gift," he said, "and we will not count it as a sign." He went down to see the vein because he wanted his eyes to have touched it. He ran a finger along the bright seam and it left a mark on his skin like sunlight you can scrape from a wall. He stood in that damp place with his breathing and the breathing of the men around him, and he felt, for a moment, heir to something more alive than a chair and a ring. The world outside the west, meanwhile, moved and collided and rearranged itself. Ravens brought news of men who declared themselves more than men. Others came with tidings of treaties that were feasts set for wolves. Tyrion read the letters and wrote replies, and sometimes he sat in a quiet with Haldan and read them again so that the second reading could be the one where he removed the words that appealed to his vanity. He asked Jane to read a few as well, and she did, and she said when his sentences were too clever by half and when they were exactly as clever as they needed to be. He knew war would come eventually and ask for more than levies of coin and grain. He knew there would be a day when the rock would be a castle again extravagant in armor. He did not want to be surprised by that day. He had a fleet built, small and honest and suited for the weather they had, not the weather of songs. He had men trained quietly. He did not put gold lions on their breastplates. He let them be men before they became heraldry. He watched them in the yard, moving in tight squares and in looser arrays, and he noted where a captain shouted too often and where another let the line sag and bent without blame to whisper corrections so that men could learn without shame. He wanted to win not only the war but the way they would speak of the day after it. On a morning when the mist rose late and clung to the windows as if the house had breath the rock wanted back, Tyrion sat with a map of the western shore and placed small stone lions where militia and watchtowers had quietly been strengthened. He He did not intend to bray about it. He intended that, when the time came, raiders would find less soft flesh and more old bone. He laid one lion at the crag and another south, near where small coves invited ships to think themselves unseen. He set one near the tooth of a cliff where only smugglers went and where they had been allowed to go because men profit by indifference. He lowered his hand and admired the little army of inanimate beasts. It was absurd and satisfying. Then he went down, as he always did, to be among the animate ones. He went to the kitchens and tasted a stew that wanted salt and told the cook so and praised the bread. He went to the smithy and stood a few moments watching two men fit iron hoops to a barrel, and he believed for those few minutes that the kingdom was a barrel and he was watching it strengthened. He went to the harbor and counted, as he had since the first months. Where the men stood, how the ships were tied, where the rope wore thin, how many children ran with baskets and did not fall. He went to the mine and did nothing but watch men come out, covered in the day's honest dirt, and he knew he could not ask them to love him, but he could ask them to trust that his hand would not reach into their homes at night and take things because it could. So when the raven came with a black ribbon, as so many ravens do when the world is about to change or has already changed and you have merely not been notified yet, and the letter inside said that the boy king had been a boy for the last time and that a man with a smile like a new coin had his fingers on the back of the throne, Tyrion read it without flinching. He folded it and set it aside and called for Halden and Armand and Jane and Bronn, because the days of small decisions had layered themselves into a day where the large ones would be asked to stand up and be counted. He looked at their faces, the scholar's careful gray gaze, the steward's worried bravery, the woman who read sums and men without separating them, the sellsword who had made a friend's village in his quarrels, and he felt, briefly, a luxury that even lords rarely get. He did not feel alone. "We will do as we have done," he said quietly. "We will keep the harbor lit and the mines safe and the children fed where we can and the men paid where we must, and we will build ships that are suited to this sea. We will pay our debts whenever we can afford to and afterward when we cannot. We will not be generous to our enemies. We will not be cruel to our friends. We will be tedious to the singers and a relief to the widows. And when war brings itself here, we will make it behave itself or we will break its nose on this rock." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room amplified those words in the only way that mattered. They were taken, carried, turned into smaller instructions, embodied in small acts that did not call attention to themselves. He would, in the days to come, issue orders and make alliances and offend dignitaries and write letters that would make men say he was clever and then curse him when they realized he had made them say it. He would fail again and correct again. He would walk at dawn and let the sea offer him its old honest counsel. On another morning, months later, a caravan of wool carts stood on the road outside the city, rain making the cloths tight over their loads. "Kindly," Tyrion said. "East then. The mills their comb the wool too roughly. Teach them gentler hands by selling to their neighbor first." He surprised himself by the joy he felt at this small clever cruelty. Perhaps it was not cruelty, merely strictness. He had learned that word had more use than discipline. He watched the carts go and then turned his horse. The rock looked down at him with its old patient face and the windows glinted like eyes. He wanted to laugh. He did not. He saved it like coin. He had inherited a cliff and a city and 1,000 stories, some older than honesty. He had made of them a place where he could stand and not be diminished by the height around him. He had taken the breath of the sea and the breath of men and tried to make them one wind. If he had been measured and found hollow once, he had filled himself with the ordinary weight of small truths. He would be judged by them. He could live with that. He went to the balcony toward dusk, as he had that first morning, and leaned his hands on the stone. The wind brought him fennel again, and smoke, and the voices of a city that was pleased with itself in the modest way a city is pleased when its shops are full enough and its roofs hold. He looked out and down and across, and his eyes found the line where the sea pulled itself into a long breath and then let it out again. He closed his eyes and listened, not as a man seeks a god, but as a man listens to his own house telling him how it will be tonight if he lets it. Somewhere in the rock a door closed. Somewhere in the city a song began, not good, not terrible, true. He turned back into the room to write, the sentence already forming, not clever, not dull. A length of rope knotted where a rope needs a knot. He placed his hand on the desk. The old gouges were under his fingers. He pressed lightly and felt them, like mouths that wanted to speak and, for once, would say what he wanted them to say.